Who's really to blame for America's catastrophic financial meltdown and devastating national recession? And see, if you look at the mainstream media doesn't believe that we're still in recession. They keep talking about how times are really great. Mr. Freeman is a New York Times best-selling author. The name of the book, Secret Weapon, links the proof of financial terrorism and reveals dangers of future attacks. He is a leading global expert on economic warfare and financial terrorism. He is a consultant to United States House and Senate members, to the CIA, FBI, SEC, Homeland Security, the Justice Department, and local and state law enforcement. He serves as Senior Fellow for the Center for Security Policy and the American Center for Democracy and Economic Warfare Institute. I would ask you to please give Mr. Freeman your good, close attention. Be ready to submit questions on the cards that are on your table toward the end. And please turn off your cell phones so that we can give Mr. Freeman our attention. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I hope you do get Frank Gaffney. He's a good friend of mine. When they mentioned the Center for Security Policy, I'm a senior fellow. That's Frank's organization, and he has some chilling information on the Muslim Brotherhood. And another good friend is Congressman Louis Gohmert, who's been doing tremendous work. There are only a handful of Congress that, there was the mention that I've spoken with senators and congressmen, and you know, it is obvious that there are some who are working for an agenda that is not the American agenda, and there are some who are working for we the people. And Congressman Gohmert, fortunately, is among those few, the proud, that are working for we the people. Now, what I'm going to share with you is another problem. I mean, we've heard the problems about education and the problems about roads and what they're doing with their tax dollars, and I'm going to share that with you, and I'm going to interrupt with 2 commercials during my presentation. So I'm just warning you ahead of time, I'm going to give you 2 commercials. I have books for sale. They're available for $20. I'll sign them. I paid $17.91 for them each. So I'm making a whopping $2.09, which I will promptly turn back to your group. Any profit. I'm not here for profit. I paid my own way here. I'll pay my own way home. I'm selling books at my cost. And the reason is I think this message is that important. And more importantly than that, I want the permission to give you the 2 commercials. So I just want to get you ready for those. And by the way, I do have magazines. There's a couple of magazines back there. There's just a handful of copies, but they're free if you want to copy these magazines from the counterterrorists. This one has a cover story on Vladimir Putin, and then this one has the picture of President Obama on the cover, but the story I wrote in this one is on non-state economic warfare, which is really about George Soros. And I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly. My time is I need to stop at 1 o'clock so you all can get back to your lives. Is that about right? So I've got about 40 minutes. It's really about an hour presentation, so I'm going to cut it, flip through a couple of things. I'd be happy to answer any questions, whatever questions you might have afterwards, either on the cards or if you want to ask afterwards. Be happy to answer, you know, what I didn't cover. But I'm just going to walk through this. Whether you realize it or not, we're in a global economic war. I mean, there's a lot of battles that we're fighting. One of them is the battle over the economy. And when I'm talking about a global economic war, I mean real enemies of the United States that are coming to attack our economy. China, Russia, Venezuela, whomever, the Islamic global caliphate planners. Well, most people in Washington don't get this. I think you probably get it, because you can believe the 3 assumptions. Number 1, you believe there are enemies of the United States of America. Okay, do you think our enemies want to go against our military, or do you think they would rather use some subversive means? And number 3, do we have vulnerabilities in our system? All right, I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency earlier this week in a symposium forum discussing these points, and people came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for giving us a fresh viewpoint. I would hope that this was understood. Let me tell you some of the things that they found maybe were a fresh viewpoint. What we consider to be a global marketplace, our enemies consider to be a battle space. What happened was, under President Clinton, remember he ran for office and he said, it's the economy, stupid? He took the National Security Council and he took the economic portion out of it and created the National Economic Council. And the thinking of economists and national security professionals broke at that point. They went different directions. Under FDR, we had a Bureau of Economic Warfare. We thought of them as one and the same. We realized that we were competing globally in a battle space. But after NAFTA and Clinton and all of that, we began to think, oh, no, free market everywhere. Everybody believes in the American way and the American system, and so we're just going to let the free market operate as much as we can internationally, and national security will be all about forming weapons and getting weapon systems. And we went different paths. We went differently than the Chinese. In 1999, 2 senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army wrote a book titled Unrestricted Warfare. And their challenge was, basically, if we ever were to engage a superpower, exactly how would we go about that? Because they noticed at the time our military was the strongest on the planet. They noticed at the time our economy was the strongest on the planet. They noticed we were winning in every respect and we were bringing people along the path to freedom. And they said, if we had to challenge America, how would you do it? And basically what they said is, we don't want to take on America directly. A full frontal assault would be suicide. Our military was much larger, our spending was much greater, our technology was much better, and they knew that we would win a direct confrontation. So they said the way to beat America is you hit her in the wallet. You make America worry about its finances and its economy, and it'll stop worrying about national security and other matters. So here's the game plan. I'll just read it to you. It says, if the attacking side, now I'm not saying the Chinese have done this. I'm not saying they will do this. I'm saying what their military doctrine said. If the attacking side musters first a large amount of capital. At the time this was written, the Chinese had about $100 billion of foreign currency reserves. They have $3.4 trillion of foreign currency reserves today. Do you think they'd muster a large amount of capital? Okay, if they muster a large amount of capital, launch a sneak attack against financial markets, and I'll describe what that means in my presentation. Number 3, buries a computer virus and hacker detachment. You think that the Chinese have hacked any of our systems? Everything. Yeah. And number 4, carry out a network attack. And number 4, ultimately the goal would be to cause the enemy nation to fall into social panic, street riots, and a political crisis. They said financial warfare. Financial warfare, new type of warfare, will be the main kind of warfare fought in the 21st century, and it won't be based on anything a military strategist has done. It won't be based on a statesman. It will be based on the techniques of George Soros. Now, in 1999, I would hazard to guess only a few of you knew who George Soros was. Many of you have learned of George Soros from Glenn Beck's exposures and other things. George Soros, I studied because I'm in the investment business, and he made a lot of money investing, destroying currencies like the British pound and the Malaysian ringgit and so forth. Just a huge fortune. So I studied him intimately to see what he did. The Chinese studied him also. They labeled him a financial terrorist. They mentioned him in the book Unrestricted Warfare 19 times, second only to their mention of Osama bin Laden, and they mentioned the two of them together 9 times. Here's what they said. They said, as we see it, a single man-made stock market crash, a single computer virus invasion, or manipulating an enemy country's exchange rates, these are the new kinds of weapons that we use in financial warfare. Think about that. Do you ever think of a stock market crash as man-made? The Chinese do. And then in February of 2011, in the magazine, it's Cheshire magazine, I wanted to pronounce it Quishi, and I got corrected. Looks like Quishi, doesn't it? Q-U-I-S-H-I. In that magazine, the senior, which is an official publication of the Communist Party, they wrote an article that said, if we're going to fight the U.S., we have to fight the U.S. with key weapons. The Bible says that the borrower is a slave to the lender.
That's right.
What do we have as a weapon, the Chinese asked, that we can use? Well, we've got all this American debt. We could dump that on the markets. Would that hurt America? Sure it would. Or we could just stop buying it for a period of time. And that would cause deep economic crisis for Washington. And they wouldn't even blame us. What they would do is they'd blame themselves. And they're right. This was a Chinese official publication. And the Chinese aren't alone in recognizing this. This is the cover story. This is the magazine I told you I had over there. Russia, China, and the New Global Democratic Peace. Vladimir Putin basically said, hey, we should get all of these nations together and replace the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. That's his big push. That's economic warfare. And this is based on KGB doctrine that was released by Jan Senya. Jan Senya is the #2 person. He was #2 in the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. He was the second highest ranking Soviet defector in history. He wrote a book, We Will Bury You, and in that book he said, basically, we know we're losing on the communist side. They know they're losing. So what they plan to do is enter an era of global democratic peace. And they're going to come up with some way that they start doing trade with Europe and the United States, and we say we're all capitalists now, basically. And we're all going to be trading free in the market. And when we do that, we're going to sneak up behind them, and we're going to use external economic weapons. And when we use those weapons, America will panic, and they'll rush in and vote in the progressive candidate who will move America towards socialism. Does that sound familiar at all?
Yes.
Think an economic panic would cause us to elect a socialist? Oh my goodness, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Well, in 1998, a professor, a Russian professor who was formerly in the KGB, very close friends with Vladimir Putin, in fact, one of his best friends, favorite university professor, he got at a conference in Linz, Austria, 400 people in 1998, and he had an amazing theory. He said, I think the United States of America will collapse by the year 2010. Wow. Where did that come from? You remember back to 1998? We're #1, right? The internet's booming, the economy's booming, the military's the strongest in the world. We hadn't had 9/11. We're winning in every front. And he gets up and people are shocked. He said, how's that going to happen? He said, U.S. foreign debt is a pyramid scheme that's going to collapse. And it's going to be painful, but if Russia and China work together to collapse the U.S. debt as a pyramid scheme, if Russia and China work together, we can replace the dollar. And if we replace the dollar, we'll emerge stronger and we'll control the world going forward. That was his prediction. How do I know this? This was published in the Wall Street Journal. So what happened in the year 2008, 10 years later, according to the Treasury Secretary of the United States, I don't know if you've seen this, the Treasury Secretary is attending the Olympics in Beijing, and Chinese officials quietly come up to him and said, by the way, Mr. Secretary, I just want you to know the Russians have come to us and asked us to dump all of our holdings of American debt. And we're your good friends, we decided not to. But the Russians did. They dumped $65 billion worth of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac debt that they held in the summer of 2008, right as the market was collapsing, right as we were having all these massive economic problems. They dumped. Had the Chinese dumped, it would have been about $500 or $600 billion on top of that. I tell you, that would have caused some serious problems if they'd stopped buying. These are economic weapons. The Chinese said they were economic weapons, and the Russians used it and tried to get China to use it against us in the year 2008. No, they're not alone. Here's another famous guy, Osama bin Laden. When he gave his speech at 9/11, he said, you know why we hit the World Trade Center? The answer is, it was a symbol of American economic might. We've got to hit the U.S. economy however we can, because if we hit the American economy hard enough, they'll pull out of the Middle East. And I'll give you one word that proves he was right. Sequestration. When our economy gets difficult, we start cutting our military, we start doing all kinds of things because we panic. And he's not alone. This guy right there, you see Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. You probably heard on Fox News today, Sean Hannity saying it over and over. He said, your kids can't get into the White House, but this supporter of terrorists has gotten into the White House. He's #2 in an organization to the Muslim Brotherhood's senior-most scholar, a man who's not even allowed to set foot in the United States, Qaradawi, who says basically capitalism's got to fail. And when it fails, the good news is Sharia-compliant finance. Sharia will take over the world. And in fact, when we had the collapse in 2008, a lot of sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East said, we're not loaning you money anymore until your banks start offering Sharia-compliant finance loans. And look, check your bank, call them up and ask if they offer Sharia finance loans. The vast majority do. Not the local banks, but the big New York Wall Street banks. It's called financial jihad, striving for the cause of Allah with your wealth. They said it's even more important than self-sacrificing. What is self-sacrificing? Blowing yourself up as a suicide bomber. They'd rather you use your money to destroy America than blow yourself up. Now, people ask, and we're getting ready for the first commercial, people ask me, do you think that Putin was coordinating with bin Laden? I can't believe that, man. I don't think that. I don't believe that. Now, we do know the KGB funded radical Islam in the Middle East. We know that. But I'm not saying that Putin was coordinating with bin Laden. I'm not suggesting that. I don't think it's any different than you put a bleeding victim in the water and the sharks all come. And I think that we've been cut and we're bleeding and the sharks are surrounding. I don't think it's humanly orchestrated. I do, however, think it's demonically orchestrated. Here's the first commercial. Saul Alinsky, in the prelude to his book, gave the dedication to Lucifer, the first radical. It's rules for radicals. We know the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I believe that there's a demonic effort to take down the United States of America. And I believe that the demons have coordinated it. Now that's the bad news. The bad news of Luke 10 is the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. There is good news, though. Jesus said, but I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Commercial number 1. There's the second one coming. Okay, at the turn of the century, the Office of Management and Budget predicted that we would have the entire federal debt paid off by the year 2010. You're laughing. You don't believe the OMB prediction? Well, of course, we're 3 years past it, and we now have $17 trillion in debt, not zero, right? Interestingly, though, the OMB said we'd have all of our budget paid off by the debt paid off by 2010, and Pandering said by the year 2010 that the U.S. would collapse from under the weight of its foreign debt. Who was right, the Russian professor or the Office of Management and Budget? So how did we get from almost paying off all of our debt to the point that our economy almost went away? I want you to listen to this. This is from Representative Paul Kanjorski, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, about what happened in 2008.
On Thursday at about 11 o'clock in the morning, the Federal Reserve noticed a tremendous drawdown of money market accounts in the United States to the tune of $550 billion was being drawn out in a matter of an hour or two. The Treasury opened up its window to help. They pumped $105 billion in the system and quickly realized that they could not stem the tide. We were having an electronic run on the banks. They decided to close the operation, close down the money accounts, and announce a guarantee of $250,000 per account so there wouldn't be further panic out there. And that's what actually happened. If they had not done that, their estimation was that by 2 o'clock that afternoon, $5.5 trillion would have been drawn out of the money market system of the United States, would have collapsed the entire economy of the United States, and within 24 hours the world economy would have collapsed. Now, we talked at that time about what would happen if that happened. It would have been the end of our economic system and our political system as we know it. And that's why, when they made the point, we've got to act and do things quickly, we did.
Okay, now just imagine that. Somebody yanked out $550 billion out of the money markets, and they estimated that if this caused a panic, if I shouted fire in here now, do you think people would rush to the exits? Somebody with $500 billion was able to influence about $5.5 trillion, and that would have collapsed the system. And that's why we have TARP and bailouts and all the other things, is this incident. What caused this incident? How did we get from having everything almost paid off to being $17 trillion of debt and having our economy almost go away? 9/11. It changed everything. Because of 9/11, they hit the economic structure. Bin Laden was quoted, he said, I'll bleed America with the death of 1,000 cuts. Every time they would spend $10,000 on an operation, we'd respond with $10 million of response. You have to take your shoes off to go through the airport. Think of all of the regulations, all of the things that we do. There was a study that just came out. Did you know that 75% of our economic growth has been sapped away by regulation? It's a study that just came out. We would have a much lower, our economy would be 50 trillion in size and not 15 trillion in size if it weren't for all of the regulations. Some of those regulations came from 9/11. Some direct spending came from 9/11 too. It wasn't cheap to send all the equipment and everything that we sent over to the Middle East to fight 2 wars. This is an economic war more than it is any other kind of war. Actually, I take that back. The second commercial, I'll tell you, it's a spiritual war. But for now, we'll stick with economic war. We were on the path to paying our debt off. The OMB was right. In the latter years of the 20th century, we were running budget surpluses. And until 9/11 hit, we didn't have any deficits. And 9/11 had a serious deficit. And we clawed our way back and we're almost break even in the year 2007. And then the financial crisis hit in 2008. And we've had trillion-dollar deficits ever since. Since the turn of the century, when the book Unrestricted Warfare was written, the Chinese economy has grown from about 6% of the world's economy to almost overtaking the US. We've gone from almost a quarter of the world's economy to right now almost the same size as China. And the International Monetary Fund predicts China will overtake us in the year 2016, 3 years from now. I don't know if that's the case or not. That's just, economists' predictions are about as bad as the OMB predictions. Nevertheless, they've grown a lot in the past 10 years, and we have not. There's been other winners. The Middle East, the OPEC nations, have moved trillions of dollars of money away from America. Did you know oil was $20 a barrel in the year 2000? It's almost $100 a barrel today. It's gotten as high as $150. Who's been the loser? The American middle class. We the people. We're the losers. Our standard of living has decreased, our wealth has decreased, our influence and voting rights have decreased. We've been the losers, and the OPEC nations and China have been the primary winners. So in 2008, David Barton had a conference in Arlington. There were 2 people speaking at the conference. A friend of mine was a mutual friend of theirs, and he said, one of these is a major assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon. He's an expert on Sharia, and the other one is a counterterrorism expert with the FBI. You've got to meet these guys. I didn't have a chance to go to the conference. He said, pick them up and take them to breakfast. I took them to breakfast, and they told me some frightening things. One of the things they told me was that the Muslim Brotherhood has plans to turn America into an Islamic nation. I was like, wow, that seems like that'd take a long time. People aren't going to wear burqas here. So no, they've got detailed plans. They're going to hit these zones, and they're going to come in, and they're going to take over. And another thing they have is they're going to remove all the friendly dictators in the Muslim nations. Like Mubarak in Egypt will be gone, and Gaddafi will be, not that he was friendly, but he was, he did give up his nuclear weapons program. Gaddafi will be gone, and they're going to slowly move out. They were right about those things. The Arab Spring, and we've seen the rise of Islam in this, both of those things were accurate. I said, but those are slow ways to do it. You want to bring America to its knees, you need to do what the Chinese said. Unrestricted warfare. Let's do financial warfare. How would that work? I said, well, you guys are with the FBI and the Pentagon. You should know this. What do you mean, how would that work? I'm a money manager out of Texas. You asking me? And they said, we don't know anything about this. So I was contacted within a week or so and asked by a group in the Pentagon, will you write a research report and explain how financial warfare works? So I wrote a little white paper and sent it to them. They came back and asked for another white paper, wrote it and sent it to them. Finally, they came back in middle of January and asked me to write a full research paper, which I did, and presented to the Defense Department in June of that year. What I found was that our entire system ignores the possibility of financial warfare. Now, let me tell you this. When I presented it, I was commissioned under the Bush administration. When I presented it, was under the Obama administration. I presented it. At first, they were very receptive. Then eventually they said, we think we're going to classify this and put you in jail if you talk about it. That's true. I've got the emails that will show. It says, we have it in our power to classify this. Get it? So what my friend did is he took a copy of my research, sent it off to Jim Woolsey, who was the former director of CIA, and Jim Woolsey sent one to John Kyle, Joe Lieberman, and John McCain. They stuck it in their safe, and he said, if you classify Freeman's research, I want you to pull this out and read it on the Senate floor. And you know what? They backed off. They didn't classify it. That's why I'm able to talk to you about it today. Anyway, what I found was our government wasn't thinking in these terms at all. And sadly, I'm not sure they're thinking in these terms yet. My hypothesis, which I'm going to run through very quickly, if you had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to destroy our economy and you were an enemy, would you do it? Of course. How would you do it? Commodity manipulation, using secret weapons, naked short selling, and credit default swaps. Oil prices went from $50 to $150 a barrel in 18 months while the nation and the world was going into a recession, while demand was going down and supply was going up. How do you triple the price of oil? And there were no supply disruptions. Nobody closed the Straits of Hormuz. There were no disruptions in the Middle East. How did oil prices triple? Basically, the Middle East sovereign wealth funds took a bunch of money and invested in the oil's future markets. We trade 10 times as much oil as we actually use. Even Rex Tillerson of ExxonMobil says that maybe 40% of the price of oil is pure speculation. Even Goldman Sachs admits that every million barrels long invested in the futures market increases the price of oil 10 cents. Basically, if a sovereign wealth fund of the Middle East wanted to bet $10 million and put 1 million barrels long in the futures market with no intention of actually taking delivery, using it, or anything, they just put $10 million in, it would increase the price of oil by 10 cents. The Middle East produces, OPEC nations produce 30 million barrels of oil a day. If you produce 30 million barrels of oil a day and you get a 10-cent bump in the price, you get an extra $3 million back. In other words, based on this analysis, you could invest $10 million, and if you were an oil producer, you'd get $3 million a day back. That's a pretty good investment, don't you think? That's what part of what happened. Part of it was a panic, part of it was a whole lot of other things. But when you've got oil producers buying long in the futures market and moving prices higher. Now, some people disagree with me on this. Goldman Sachs used to, and ExxonMobil was silent. But since my research has come out, I've talked to several of these people. Dan Dicker, who wrote the book Oil's Endless Bid, go buy that book, read that, and it'll tell you that people playing in the futures markets are driving prices permanently higher. ExxonMobil CEO, the Saudi oil minister has said this. Richard Eckhouse, the chairman emeritus of the MIT Economics Department, I've had long conversations. He says, of course you can do that. Of course it works that way. I've even talked to Boone Pickens about this. Okay, and by the way, there's a star asterisk on Boone Pickens, and the reason is he says that's not how they manipulate prices. They manipulate prices by restricting supply. As it doesn't matter to me, they're manipulating prices. Okay, that's phase one. When oil goes from $50 to $150 a barrel, it hurts our economy, it hurts our pocketbooks. You're spending more money and you can't pay your mortgages easily. That's an attack on our economy. It's economic warfare. Phase two is the stock market collapse. This guy, George Soros, what caused the stock market collapse? How did we get to where Paul Kanjorski said we're about to collapse as a whole nation? Our economic system almost failed. According to Soros, what happened is there were bear raids against targeted financial companies, AIG, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers. He said bear raids were shorting stocks and buying credit default swaps. And those, how many people here are familiar with naked short selling or credit default swaps? Okay, I'm going to take just a minute to explain each of those for you. Naked short, do you know what traditional short selling is? Traditional short selling is very simple. If you think the price of Apple computer at $700 a share is too high, and you don't own any of it, and you want to make a profit as it goes down, you borrow shares. You go find a friend, this gentleman here, loan me a share of Apple, I borrow a share from Apple, I'll go sell it on the market, I sell it for $700, the price drops to $400, I buy it back and I give you back your share. That's short selling. It's legal, it's acceptable, it happens all the time in the markets. Very easy. And I would actually pay you like $10, $20 for your trouble loaning to me. That's interest on the loan, so to speak. That's short selling. Naked short selling is not doing that in your underwear at your E-Trade account. Naked short selling is where you don't bother to borrow the share. So you just call your broker and say, sell me a share of Apple. and then you never show up and deliver it. That's called a fail to deliver. Failure to deliver. Failed trades from naked short selling accounted for 30 to 70% of the decline in the share price of Lehman. Lehman is what triggered all of this. What naked short sellers do is sell large quantities of stock they don't have, they flood the market with phantom shares, depress a company's share price, and make the shares less scarce and less valuable. You think if somebody sold short naked 10 million shares of a stock one day, picked it up and said, sell 10 million shares, do you think that would hurt the stock price? On September 11th, 2008, there were 22,365,000 shares of Lehman Brothers naked sold short. Over the course of a week, it was close to 100 million shares. Do you think that hurt Lehman's price? Of course it did. It dropped Lehman from $65 a share to 21 cents a share, and then the company declared bankruptcy. How could you do this legally? Isn't it illegal? Well, a man named Bernie Madoff got the SEC to approve an exemption that allowed naked short selling. He called it the Madoff exemption. And basically it says if you're a broker-dealer and you want to naked short sell and do it for a short period of time, it's legal. He says they never caught on to my crime. I would stay naked short. In other words, I'd sell stock that I didn't own, and it fits. He ran a Ponzi scheme. That's what Ponzi schemers do. He sold stock he didn't own, and he never ever even bothered to borrow it or buy it out. He said they never caught on to my practice of staying naked short. It seems funny. It seems illegal. Daily settlement fails spiked. Do you see the spike right there in that chart? This is in The Economist magazine. That's when Lehman Brothers failed. That's when Bear Stearns failed. That's proof that it was naked short selling. People sold stock they didn't own, panicked everybody, and then the price collapsed. This mentions a report commissioned by the Pentagon. That's my report, and this is mentioned in The Economist. Gosh, what if terrorists decided to use that to destabilize our financial system? So what did the SEC do on September 19th after the horse got out of the barn? They shut the door. Brilliant government strategy here. On September 19th, they canceled all short selling, naked short selling, any kind of short selling. And that flustered Wall Street. They said, what are you doing? Well, Barry Ritholtz gave the only possible explanation based on some comments he got from Emerald Asset Management's Joe Bessiker. And that is, he said the bear raids. Remember the term bear raid from George Soros? The bear raids were not a case of Goldman Sachs going after Lehman Brothers or U.S. sharks trying to make a profit. The vast majority of it was coming from London and Dubai, and it happened on the anniversary of 9/11. Anybody looking to see if this is financial terrorism? In fact, Jim Cramer said the same thing on his show. He basically said, my friends, the traditional people are not shorting. It could be financial terrorism. What a great way to destroy America. Now, who else was naked short selling? Well, in August of 2007, Sharia Capital with Barclays Bank and a few others decided to create a mechanism by which Islamic Sharia compliant groups could naked short sell or short sell. The problem they had was if they borrowed stock, like I mentioned from this gentleman here, you have to pay interest. So they had to create a mechanism that didn't actually borrow stock and pay interest, which looks an awful lot like naked short selling. They created the Al-Safi Trust. And so in 2007, in August, when the Dow was in the 14,000 range, they created this, and in March 2009, when George Soros told us that the problem was bear raids, the Dow was 6,500. 14,000 to 6,500 is a pretty sharp drop. And in the Pentagon, they had a seminar called Unrestricted Warfare Seminar, where they actually showed how a sovereign wealth fund could hit a target company. And you can't really read this, but that's a sovereign wealth fund, and these are cutouts and banks and hedge funds and side pockets and so forth, how they could do it without leaving fingerprints. Why didn't the government stop them? Well, the government didn't stop any naked short sellers. According to the Inspector General of the SEC, 5,000 complaints of naked short selling and 0 enforcement actions. So I went in and saw Mr. Cox at the SEC, and he said, of course it could be used. Of course it could be used to drive down stock price, to manipulate markets, to destroy the American economy. So that's one secret weapon, naked short selling. The second secret weapon I found was credit default swaps. And I'll give you a very brief explanation on that too, because I know we're tight on time. Credit default swap is insurance on a debt. If I borrow from Bank of America and they think that I'm not going to be good for it, they go to an insurance company and they buy a credit default swap on me. Now that's kind of meaningless, but when Lehman Brothers borrowed money from a big bank like JP Morgan, they wanted to insure the debt, so they went to AIG and bought insurance in case Lehman Brothers fails and doesn't pay us back. AIG agreed that they would pay back. That's a credit default swap arrangement. Now the problem is 1999 they were specifically exempted from any regulatory oversight by any agency in the United States. So nobody was monitoring credit default swaps. And what it meant was that JP Morgan loaned money to Lehman Brothers, and if Lehman didn't pay back, then they would get reimbursed. But AIG could also sell credit default swaps to the Islamic Bank of Kenya. And the Islamic Bank, I don't even know, I don't think there is an Islamic Bank of Kenya, but I'm just throwing that as an example. The Islamic Bank of Kenya could buy a credit default swap if Lehman Brothers failed, they'd get paid back, and they never even loaned money to Lehman. All of a sudden it becomes more valuable to have Lehman fail than have Lehman succeed if you own a bunch of their credit default swaps, as long as AIG was good for the money and could pay off the insurance. Well, fortunately, the American taxpayer stood behind AIG, and so all of our tax dollars went to pay back all of that. You could have, if Lehman Brothers had $100 million in debt, you could have $100 billion worth of payouts, because there was no limit on the amount of credit default swaps you had. Basically, it's like buying fire insurance on your neighbor's house. I heard another example. Last night it was confirmed to me that in Louisiana there was a period of time you could buy life insurance on total strangers. Did you know that? Amazingly, accidents increased. Car accidents, murder rates. It's just, I don't know why that happened, but it's crazy that we had credit defaults. You couldn't buy a 32-ounce soda in New York for a period of time, but the New York bankers sitting in Wall Street could buy and sell all the credit default swaps that could ruin the world. Can't buy lemonade at a lemonade stand, but you can buy credit. I mean, it's just crazy. Warren Buffett called them financial weapons of mass destruction. And you'll see the spike in credit default swap rates. This is when Bear Stearns failed. This is when Lehman Brothers failed. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it almost destroyed the entire financial system. It did it because of naked short selling, credit default swaps, and they had a lot of problem loans. They weren't the best capitalized, best bank. They met all the capital standards, but they had serious subprime loans. And I'm not saying they didn't have problems. Bear Stearns had problems. They got bought by JP Morgan. What happened to Lehman Brothers? They bankrupted. Why didn't somebody buy them? The group that was chosen to buy them, on one weekend, Merrill Lynch was failing, and they brought Bank of America in, and they said, you're buying Merrill Lynch. And Bank of America owns Merrill Lynch today. Barclays Bank, you're going to buy Lehman Brothers. Remember Barclays that helped create the Arboon transaction. Barclays, at the time, their largest investors were two sovereign wealth funds out of the Middle East, Abu Dhabi and Qatar. Those two sovereign wealth funds had the right to have 53% controlling interest of Barclays if Barclays took government money or did some other things. When Lehman failed, we thought Barclays would buy them. Barclays had said they wanted them, but they turned it down. Why? According to the UK government, because it would have required a shareholder vote. How hard is it to get two shareholders to vote if they're willing? They weren't willing. So what happened was Lehman went bankrupt, Barclays bought Lehman's assets out of bankruptcy. Barclays marked up the value of those assets by $5 billion in the midst of the crisis, and then Abu Dhabi and Qatar pulled out about $5 billion in the next 6 months. And the rest of the financial system, all of our tax dollars went to pay off all those credit default swaps. We all got burned, and they made money. When Lehman Brothers failed, the whole system started to collapse. And it's happened since then. We had the flash crash in May 6, 2010. The Dow dropped 1,000 points in about 6 minutes' time based on trading algorithms. Al-Qaeda was caught when bin Laden was killed. They found in his possession documents talking about destroying the economy of Europe. So what does Germany do? Germany, for fear of financial terrorism, actually bans naked short selling and naked credit default swaps. And you know, from the day they did this until the present, the euro has gone up in value against the dollar, even though the European economy has gotten worse and worse. They did a smart move. And we've seen other dots since then. We've seen the Boston Marathon bomber was inspired by the magazine Al-Qaeda, inspired by Al-Qaeda. That same magazine talks about economic warfare. We saw the Twitter flash crash. Did you hear about that? AP Twitter feed was hacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, supposedly. And the Syrian Electronic Army said the White House has been attacked and it's in flames and the president's been hurt. And the stock market dropped instantly because the AP feed was, and that was their intent, was to see if they could make the stock market go down. So we did a war game in the Pentagon. It's called Unrestricted Warfare, based on the name of the Chinese book. And in the war game, if the Russians and the Chinese team up and decide to remove the dollar's world reserve currency, the dollar crashes. That's the finding of our war game. It matches the finding of the Russian studies professor. Why? Because our debt is so extraordinary. We're spending $400 million an hour. So Prime Minister Putin, at the time he was Prime Minister, called for, in January 2009, we've got to end the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And the Chinese appear to be going along at this point. They're doing everything they can to make the renminbi, the yuan, the Chinese currency, a world reserve currency to help replace the dollar. Now, don't worry. Treasury Secretary Geithner says the dollar will never lose its reserve status. Do you see that? Even if the yuan gets stronger, we'll always be the reserve currency. So don't worry. I mean, this is the same Treasury Secretary who told us that we would never lose our AAA credit rating, right? Yeah. That's April 2011. We'll never, no risk. Is there a risk the United States could lose its AAA credit rating? Yes or no? Geithner's response, no risk of that. Of course, in August, 4 months later, the S&P downgraded the U.S. credit rating, but never mind that. Don't worry, Geithner says, never will we lose our reserve currency. The Chinese wouldn't do it to us anyway. I mean, the same Chinese that this is General Xi, who was the head of the PLA, who said it would be indeed brutal to kill 100 or 200 million Americans. But if it ensured the China century, we might think about it. This is the same Chinese that the Pentagon says has hacked everything we own. And then Jim Rickards and Steve Forbes talked about the next war. The next war won't be fought on the battlefield. It's basically a war using economic weapons of mass destruction. What we consider to be a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. How do you be a superior enemy? See that? Launch a sneak attack against the financial markets, and then you crash the system. Who have I told about this? Well, I briefed CIA, DIA, SEC, DOD, you name it. This is Jim Woolsey, who was the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Kevin Hassett, who's got this quote here, who was the senior economist at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Lieutenant General Boykin, who's a very good, great American. I'm honored to call him friend. Bill Posey, I could put Louis Gohmert's picture up here. But a lot of good patriotic congressmen and women. Ed Meese, the former Attorney General under Reagan. Frank Gaffney, we mentioned earlier. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College. It's been published in the Washington Times, the London Times. The book hit top-selling status on Amazon for terrorism and stock market investing as recently as November's election night. I've been on Glenn Beck, CNBC. Glenn Beck's pointing to my book, saying, buy this book. Jewish Voice of Victory, C-SPAN, and Fox News with Megyn Kelly. It's written up. I put a couple of these magazines out there. There's a few copies. If you've got Cowards, you can open up and read it for free. If you just want the information, go to glennbeck.com/cowards. Glenn has put out a full feature-length documentary on this research. Will be coming out within 30 to 60 days. It'll be advertising on the Glenn Beck program. And then I did a study for the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, for a group that did for the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And the bottom line of it is economic threats are as real as any missiles or any other threats we face. So we're creating an institute called National Security Investment Consultant Institute. We've got the Beck documentary coming out. We're training investment advisors, because somewhere in this room someone will say, you're a money manager, that's your day job, would you manage my money? And I'll talk to you about that if you're interested. But you might want your existing financial planner just to learn what I've learned. And so we're going to train them at the Keating Center. If you're interested, sign up and make a note of that. What can you do? Get educated, demand your representatives become educated, demand your financial advisor get educated. Now, here's commercial number 2. I've run out of time, but I'm going to put it in anyway. It's too important to ignore. All those things I just told you are not our problem. Our problem is not economic warfare. Our problem is spiritual. We are a nation under a curse. Read Deuteronomy 28 and 29 and read about a nation that lends to many nations, or a nation that borrows from every nation. We're a nation borrowing from every nation. That's a nation under a curse. The most descriptive definition of a nation under a curse that I got out of that was when I read about a nation under a curse is where the enemy alien lives among you and rises higher and higher, and the citizens fall lower and lower. You get that feeling? That's what's going on. We're a nation. Why? Because we've turned away from God. We were founded on godly principles, and we've turned away from them. Now, in the military, don't ask, don't tell used to mean if you're homosexual, we'll tolerate you. Just don't tell anybody about it. That's gone. You're all welcome in the military, unless you're Christian. And now it's don't ask, don't tell for Christians. You can't talk about it. If the problem is spiritual, the solution is spiritual. 2 Chronicles 7:14 is an answer by God to a prayer from King Solomon, who had just finished the temple. They just finished the temple and they were celebrating. They just finished the temple and Solomon says, this people are going to mess up bad. I know they all. That was his heart. That was going. Yeah, this from a man who married how many wives and concubines and so forth. Had this great wisdom and still, because that's human nature is sinful and we make mistakes. We fail. And he knew they would fail. And he said, if we fail as a people, God, and we get on our knees in your temple that we just dedicated to you, will you hear us if we pray and ask you to forgive us? And God, what happens if your people aren't at your temple, but they're outside the camp? They're somewhere else, and they get on their knees and pray. Will you forgive them then? What if a foreigner comes in and prays at this temple? Will you hear that prayer? He was curious. He wanted to know, what are your principles, God? What do you want to have from us? And he answered in a dream, and he said, if my people, not the foreigner, my people who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, not his hand, his face. Seek my face. Turn from their evil ways, repent from their sins. Then I, the Lord God, will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. Those are the principles. It's not up to Washington, it's up to you and me. And it doesn't take that many people. I was, God, we don't have enough people. And I was taken to the passage where Abraham was arguing over Sodom and Gomorrah, and 5 people would have been enough. There are enough people in this room to save this nation. It requires us to get on our faces before God and to cry out to God. Nehemiah chapter 1 was one man, Nehemiah. He got word that came in. He said the walls of Jerusalem were torn down. He didn't immediately go to the king and look for the solution. He didn't go to Washington and say, give me some money, we'll solve this problem. What he did was he tore his clothes, he got on his face, and he fasted, and he sought God, and he said, God, what do I do? And then he had permission to go to the king, and the king gave him permission to go back and rebuild the walls. He sought God first. The promise in Jeremiah 18 is a beautiful promise. It says basically, I don't care if your nation was founded by savages and haters of God. If you repent, I will heal you and restore you. But it also says this. Jeremiah is not a very happy book. There's a lot of really tough stuff in there. But he says this in the promise. He says, I don't care how bad you've been. If you repent, I'll forgive you. But he also says, I don't care if you were founded on godly principles and your fathers served me and your grandfathers. I don't care about that. If you turn away from me, I will punish you. That's where we are now. We were founded on godly principles. Our nation's turned from God, and we're being punished. Why did we turn from God? Because we made government our idol, and we made our wallets our idol. You know what we did in response to 9/11? President Bush said, we're on a wartime footing. What did he tell you to do? Take out your credit cards and go shopping. That's not how you win a war. You win a war with sacrifice. This is a spiritual war, and it's going to take sacrifice. The fact that you gave up your lunch hour here is indication of your sacrifice. We're going to have to fight on every level. Education, economy, because it's a spiritual war and it touches every level. And everything we do must be done in love. So anyway, you endured my 2 commercials. and you put up with me, and I squeezed it in, and I went a little long. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take questions. And if you wouldn't mind turning the camera on.